Good afternoon. The time is 5:37 p.m. on November 16th, 2016, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Hayworth, please call the roll.
Mr. Jacobson.
Present.
Ms. Williams. Present. Ms. Lord.
Present.
Ms. Wilson-Phelan. Ms. Wilson-Phelan. Ms. Wattenberg. Ms. Anderson. Ms. Anderson. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Whedon.
Present.
Ms. Jolly. Ms. Jolly. Ms. Hall. Ms. Hall. Mr. Jerosen.
Here.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Schmidt.
Good evening. I am Jeff Schmidt, a DC resident and author of Disciplined Minds, a book about education. My daughter attended public school here in Washington, D.C. from grades K through 12 and is now a beginning student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm here today to ask you to stop your academic racial profiling of the children of Washington, D.C. As you know, you set lower proficiency expectations for black students than for white students in the final years of the No Child Left Behind law. Please promise not to do that again in the proficiency targets that you are setting under the new law, the Every Student Succeeds Act. It is okay to have a lower end-of-year proficiency expectation for a student because the student begins the year with a very low proficiency, but not simply because the student is black. How would you explain to a student that you are putting her into a low proficiency expectation group because she is black? It would be easy to find a way to set unprejudiced proficiency expectations that are consistent with ESSA regulations, but only if you have the will to do so. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education would need to establish a working group open to all DC stakeholders to recommend a plan for equitable proficiency targets. OSSE's ESSA stakeholder meetings and webinars did not address the issue of academic racial profiling, but rather focused on accountability measures. I have raised this issue with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, and they have expressed absolutely no interest in it. It is obvious that they are planning to establish a system of academic racial profiling, so it is up to you, the Board of Education, to call for an equitable plan. Will you please direct OSSE to establish a working group of stakeholders to recommend a proficiency target plan that doesn't involve academic racial profiling? Such a plan would probably also solve the problem of educational triage, where schools focus attention disproportionately on students who are on the cusp of advancing from non-proficient to proficient. Similarly, it would solve the big problem that the schools don't make much effort to improve the proficiency of students who are already somewhat proficient. For example, it looks like the board is getting ready to approve a plan under which schools would have absolutely no incentive to advance students from proficiency level 4 to level 5, even though students who perform at level 5 can gain admission to top-rated universities. And of course, I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schmidt. Ms. Wells. Sorry.
No, I'm Valerie.
Ms. Jablo. Ms. Lord, and then Ms. Wattenberg.
First of all, thank you all for being here. Terrific turnout, particularly from our teachers, our parents, and our involved community members. So this is, I think, what our members of Congress had in mind when they approved the replacement for No Child Left Behind. We really are in a great place to shape the next generation of school reform, and this is where it begins. I'd like to start with just exploring for a moment the alternative measures. We spend a lot of time on test prep. The reality is that The only thing that is required is about 11 hours worth of testing. It's probably even less now for the park exam at the end of the year. So that's something that is internal to the various school systems or the charter schools, and that seems to me something that is fixable and addressable. But how do we encourage schools to do the kinds of things that President Davis talked about, the project-based learning, the career awareness, the arts and the science and the technology that has been sort of squeezed out of the curriculum over the course of No Child Left Behind? Would social emotional measures get there? What kinds of things would be proxies for the safety of a school or the health of a school? Some people have suggested measuring chronic absenteeism. But that to me seems a very poor measure, and I'd sort of like to hear all four of you discuss what we might consider in terms of like school welcoming, healthy climate.
Well, I think we have to make a clear distinction between testing and test prep. We do need testing, but the real problem for the educational process is the inordinate amount of time spent on test prep. I think test prep should be banned, actually, altogether. When I went to elementary school, we had an annual test. There was absolutely no test prep. And that's the way it is in the elite private schools in Washington, D.C. So I'd say find a way to ban test prep, but certainly go ahead with the 11 or fewer hours that you mentioned, Mary Lord, of the park exam. We do need that, and we do need to publish the scores, and we do need to publish the scores of subgroups. We can't go back to hiding that, which was done before No Child Left Behind. You know what I'm talking about, right? And secondly, I would say a good measure for a good school is parent participation. My daughter went to Alice Deal Middle School and Woodrow Wilson High School, and those are top-rated DCPS schools, and there's a tremendous amount of parent participation.
As an experienced teacher of 40 years, highly effective for all 40, I might add, I do know that when teachers are allowed to teach the content, that the test takes care of itself. So test prep becomes unnecessary.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Ms. Wattenberg.
Yeah, so I want to start by saying so many things were raised, I have so many questions, and I have so few minutes. So I'm going to try to cover new ground and also ask some old ones. But first, I want to start with Jeff because you said something that I certainly have no idea about, and I wanted to ask you about it, this idea that there's academic racial profiling, and I wonder what you're talking about.
Well, in a way, it's shocking that you don't know about that. As I said, the schools in the final years of the No Child Left Behind law set lower end-of-year proficiency expectations for black students than for white students. And on the second page of my written testimony, which all of you have, you will see an example of that from the school that my daughter attended.
All right.
Woodrow Wilson High School.
Let me try to interrupt you because I think, and maybe somebody, maybe a representative from OSSI can confirm this. I think that was under the original rules of No Child Left Behind with the AMAOs or whatever, and that has not been part of our system, and that it is not required in the new ESSA law, and that there is nobody who would want to do that. So
Of course it's not required. That's why I'm here to ask you not to do it
yeah,
again.
no, and it's not part of the proposal. That's what I'm saying.
All the
Okay.
indications are that that's the way that the Office of the State Superintendent of Education is going to go. They're preparing to do that. I raised the question with them recently 6 times. I talked, for example, to Jessie Hartis, who is a deputy chief of staff at OSSI, and I asked her outright, will you please promise not to do this again? And she was very direct. She said, no, she's not going to make that promise. And every indication I get is that they are going to recommend to you a system in which there are lower end-of-year proficiency expectations for black students than for white students.
Well, thank you for raising that. I have not seen that in the proposal. We will, speaking for myself, we will keep an eye out on that. My understanding is that was part of the original No Child Left Behind, and I have not heard anybody raise it, and I certainly agree with you that it should not be in there.
It wasn't part of the original. The excerpt on the second page, the table that all of you have, is not from the original No Child Left Behind. It is from the No Child Left Behind law waiver that you got Arnie Duncan to approve. And you can see it covers the years 2012 through 2017. So it's not the original No Child Left Behind.
We will look into it. Let me, thank you.
It's not the proficiency level, it's the rate they have to make.
Okay.
Thank you so very much for your time, and we'll call up the next panel. Is Karen Ernst has arrived? Please come down and take the farthest seat on your right, please. Lucia Nyankale? I apologize for all of these names that I'm going to butcher. You can take the seat next to Ms. Ernst. Sarah Baldoff. And Eric Martell.